when we've spoken about Bitcoin, the narrative has been pretty straightforward. It's digital gold, it's a store of value, the asset you hold when you want security, when you want something that's decentralized, scarce, and also pretty resilient. But at the same time, one of the most powerful ideas behind crypto as a whole has always been programmable money. The ability to not just hold value, but to actually use it, to lend it, borrow against it, build financial products on top of it, and essentially create an entire financial system that runs without any sort of intermediary. And historically, that kind of innovation has largely lived on networks like Ethereum. That's where DeFi really, really took off. So for a long time, Bitcoin kind of sat outside of that conversation entirely. But that's starting to change. We're now seeing serious efforts to bring Bitcoin into DeFi, whether that's through tokenization, wrapped assets, or new infrastructure being built around it. And naturally, that opens up a much, much bigger question. What happens when the most secure and widely held crypto asset in the world becomes programmable in a meaningful way? Now, to help us answer this, I'm really excited uh, to bring along our guest for today. I'm really happy to be joined by Nadia Song. Uh, Nadia is the director of marketing and operations at Bit Global, which is closely tied to WBTC, one of the most important bridges between Bitcoin and DeFi today. She brings over 2 decades of experience in marketing, with the last several years focused specifically on blockchain, working across centralized exchanges, wallets, and tokenized assets. And I think more importantly, she's been right at the center of this shift that's happening right now. Nadia, really great to have you on the show. I'd love to start with a bit more about your journey in your own words. How did you find your way into crypto and into Bitcoin DeFi more specifically?
Hello, hi, Anush. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So,
Yes, yes, yeah.
yeah, so I'm from WBTC, I'm Nadia. I always like to share this little story about how I get into crypto because it's really, really interesting. Someone from a centralized exchange they called me. They text me on LinkedIn. And then so I then give them my number and then they call me. And then you know what? We were in the conversation for several months. And I keep thinking that they are a scam. And they said, no, why don't you come to the office? So I know lots about crypto back then. So they said, no, you can come to the office. And I said, no, might be I'll get kidnapped when I go to the office. So but then after that, like COVID came, right? And I was doing like sport shoes, with Nike, Adidas, blah blah blah. So then market switched, and then so I called the HR and I said, like, are you still hiring? And how much is your salary? Blah blah blah. And then she asked me to go down. So when I was there, the founder of the CX was talking to me. I was given a very different impression from what I have in crypto. Um, it's really about transparency, fairness, and credibility. And so my perspective changed. And the moment you come into crypto, you never leave.
Mhm. Yep, absolutely. I think there's a lot of stories of people getting into crypto and getting into the rabbit hole of what's possible in this space, and just the community behind crypto as well, right? That really builds upon innovation and also builds upon what is possible in the space as well. So I completely resonate with that as well. Um, I think that's really super interesting. I think that also that's a perfect place to start. Because when we talk about Bitcoin and DeFi specifically today, it feels almost like such a obvious narrative, but it really wasn't always like this, right? So I want to go back to the beginning a little bit. What was the original sort of motivation behind creating WBTC? And what was the core problem you were trying to solve at the time?
So back in like 2019, Ethereum was the golden bull. And then we all loved Ethereum. It was transparent, it had fast confirmation, and then smart contract, ERP tokens were like booming, right? But interestingly, most of these tokens on centralized exchange, they were actually trading against Bitcoin, not ETH. So that was a clear gap in the market. Bitcoin liquidity wasn't really accessible in DeFi. So that's why in 2019, essentially, WBTC was created was to bring Bitcoin onto Ethereum and unlock the liquidity in DeFi. And over time, it evolved beyond just being a liquidity effect, right? So protocols and DeFi, they started accepting BTC as collateral and then expanding its use case in the space. Yeah, so back then it was only Ethereum, but the space grew so much, and then now WBTC is like almost like everywhere. We have like Solana, Tron, Arbitrum, L1, L2, everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's actually really interesting because I think people forget about that phase of the market where Ethereum was exploding with innovation. DeFi was definitely picking up alongside it, but Bitcoin, as the largest asset as it is, was almost sitting on the sidelines. And like you said, the liquidity was there, but it just wasn't accessible in a programmable way. And I really like this framing as well that I see on your website. Uh, Bitcoin's passport to DeFi, because that's essentially what it has become. Uh, so, building on that, let's perhaps simplify this for someone who's tuning in, who's completely new to this space. Uh, if someone is hearing about WBTC for the first time, how does it actually work? And what's actually happening under the hood?
So how do WBTC works? You know, WBTC is actually wrap Bitcoin. Yeah, so we wrap the Bitcoin, bring Bitcoin to DeFi, and it's one is to one. And so where does your Bitcoin goes when you wrap and become WBTC? So your Bitcoin is actually stored safely in cold storage, and then with multi-signature security over globally. Yeah, and then it's fully transparent. You can check it online on this website under the transparency. Yeah, when you scroll down, you have the proof of reports our mean and current. So at any time, 24/7. So using WBTC, it just feels like using Bitcoin. It's actually the same. They are the standardized tokenized Bitcoin. But you get the extra benefit for participating in DeFi. Bitcoin can't, all right? So, and then in DeFi, you can do lending, borrowing, providing liquidity, or even trading. Because if not, then Bitcoin only becomes a store of value. Or maybe you can do
Yeah.
trading on centralized exchange. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, fascinating. Uh, I think the transparency angle is very important, especially in today's environment where trust in this space is such a huge factor. Um, the idea as well that you can actually verify reserves on chain and that it's fully backed 1:1, I think that's a huge deal, especially when you're essentially bringing Bitcoin into another ecosystem altogether. Uh, so I think that's really crucial, and that's a great point that you brought up there. Uh, Now, taking this a bit forward, where we've obviously come a long way since 2019. What would you say were some of the key milestones that really drove WBTC adoption over time?
Yeah, so I think it was in DeFi summer 2020 where BTC price shot up from 9,000 all the way to 11,000. And so during that time, the WBTC supply also jumped from 1,000 BTC to over 200,000 BTC in 2020, in just that 1 year. So I think DeFi Summer, unlike other tokens that were thriving slightly, it happened in a window where Bitcoin has become stable enough to act as a collateral, and the capital rotated into on-chain yield opportunities. So then later in Q4 2020, we saw BTC took over and rank up all the way to 20K. So I
Yeah,
think thanks
yeah,
for like,
absolutely.
yes,
No, you're spot on with DeFi summer really being an inflection point. Uh, and I think it's actually crazy to think about how quickly things scaled, during that period from something that was considered relatively niche to becoming a core piece of DeFi infrastructure. So it's really exciting to see what WBTC has done in a relatively short span of time, but the innovations that's happening, I think, really stand out. I really, yeah. Um, Now, I think this brings me to something I think a lot of people still don't fully understand. Uh, because the thing is, even today, when we talk about Bitcoin, it still feels somewhat separate from DeFi in people's minds. So the question I had was, why has Bitcoin historically been so difficult to deploy in DeFi? And how exactly does WBTC bridge that gap?
I think even until today, um, it is still very challenging to deploy native Bitcoin. I have seen solutions, but not yet in place. Yeah, so I'll explain in very simple layman Web 2 kind of English. Satoshi developed Bitcoin and runs on a network, also Bitcoin native network. And he disappeared. And he locked the
Mm.
contract. It's not upgradable. But there is no thriving ecosystem on Bitcoin native network. It's slow and it's expensive. And so the times are changing. We see new technology coming up every day. I think I'm still looking at like quantum, something like that. So um, what happened is that Bitcoin cannot leave Bitcoin native network to go to Ethereum. It cannot just like you plug and go there. It's not like us moving house. We just plug all our furnitures into the lorry and then we move. No, we can't. This technology, so it can't cross. So for it to cross, WBTC will have to give the Bitcoin rails and send it to other chains. But then, of course, when WBTC is already on other chains, we cannot allow your Bitcoin to do more, right? If not, it would be a double representation. So we lock your Bitcoin out. So
Yeah.
this is how I
Uh,
explain to my
yeah. No, sorry. I think that's key. It makes a lot of sense as well. Bitcoin is incredibly secure by the design itself, uh, but it also sort of limits its flexibility, which you were mentioning, right? It wasn't built for programmability in the same way. So I think what WBTC is essentially doing is unlocking that without compromising on the core asset itself. Am I right in saying that?
of course.
Mhm. Perfect. Yeah. So I think that brings me to the present now. What are the most common ways people are actually using WBTC today?
Ah, I think the most common and most popular use case is land and power. So I'm taking Aave, for example, we have over 2 billion of supply in Aave. And then next time is providing liquidity in DeFi pools. So you can also use it to trade on decentralized exchange. These are the three main
Understood.
use cases.
Um,
Sorry.
yeah, and that's where it really starts to click, right? Because now I think it's not just more about holding Bitcoin. You know, we've heard the term hodling Bitcoin over cycles. Uh, it's actually the narrative now is shifting towards doing something with it in your wallet, whether that's earning yield or using it as a collateral, participating in liquidity essentially. I think it starts to feel much closer to a full and complete financial system rather than just solely being seen as a store of value. And I think that's where the whole institutional angle comes into the picture as well. And that's when they really start to pay attention. Uh, so, on that note, what actually makes WBTC the industry standard, especially for institutional holders? We've heard about Bitcoin adoption through the institutional lens now for years, but how does it relate to WBTC and why has it stood out compared to other solutions?
I think the number one most important thing is because the BTC has the deepest liquidity among all tokenized Bitcoin. Like when you think of housing Bitcoin DeFi, the first thing you think of is WBTC. Second is we are really very accessible because we are everyday. And crossing chain is so easy. Yeah. And then it comes down to three main things too: custody, transparency, and process. So Bitcoin is held securely. Every WBTC is backed by anything. Burden is free on chain. And then plus approved merchants, only the approved merchants can handle the trades. And so institutions they kind of know that the system is safe and verifiable. So you know what? Something very interesting about WBTC holders is why you won't be able to monetize them as much as credibility and security.
Yeah, and I think those pillars, right, custody, transparency, and process are exactly what institutions actually look for. That's the credibility signals, because at that level, it's not just about the opportunity, right? It's about risk management and also verifiability. So I think now it's important to actually make this practical for someone listening. Say someone already holds Bitcoin, for example, and they're curious about exploring the potential of Bitcoin through DeFi. Uh, what would you say is the simplest way for them to actually get started with WBTC?
Uh, I think most of the Bitcoin holders they are on CX. So what you need to do is, I think you need to have a DeFi wallet. Yeah, and then you need to know like which DeFi protocols or platforms want to go to. And that makes it very easy to just convert your BTC to WBTC on any CEX or DEX and then send it to your DeFi wallet and connect to the protocol. I think some of the protocols they also allow CEX wallets. Or if not, as a newcomer, you can also explore Web3 wallets in within the CX. For example, I think Binance has it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
then
awesome.
so easy.
Yeah, yeah. I think I like that. I mean, keeping it simple, because I think a lot of people overcomplicate the first step, right? When in reality it can actually be quite straightforward if you're using the right platforms, like you mentioned. And I think that naturally brings up the last piece, which is probably the biggest concern for most people entering this space, which is, of course, security. we've seen everything, right? We've seen everything from smart contract exploits, from uh, platform risks as well. So I think it's a very valid concern. So I suppose my question would be, what advice would you actually give newcomers who are interested in DeFi but are worried about security?
I think before we check on the protocols or DeFi or Web3, we must always remember a few things before investing is that we must not be greedy. Yeah, and
Mhm,
second is you only invest in the amount that you can afford to lose. There's no sure win. Yeah, and then in
mhm,
terms of security, new users, or in fact, existing users like you and me, can just stick to platforms with institutional custody, and then verify smart contracts, and then proof of users. Yeah, and then you must always do your own research and start small.
yes, absolutely.
And then
I
always check,
always preach.
yeah,
Yes, yes,
sorry,
continue.
one
Sorry,
last thing.
I'm sorry.
Check
Yeah.
assets are fully backed and transparent. So this is extremely challenging when it comes to DeFi because DeFi means no control. So
Absolutely.
do your own research. Yeah, go with credible platforms.
Yeah, I think that's something that I really preach as well. DYOR, everyone. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of educational material out there. And I think use it to the max, because once you learn how to do your own research, things in the space become so much more easier to navigate. Uh, so yeah, I think that's a
Yeah,
great way to, you know, wrap up this stream. But I also think there's a pretty big milestone that I'm seeing on the website as I log in today. Uh, Nadia, would you like to perhaps go a little bit on being live on Spark? I think that's a pretty exciting new venture there.
right. So it just happened yesterday. So we are on spot now. You can use the BTC as a collateral and borrow a few stables coins over there. I think Spark is quite a credible platform, right? And we've been always wanting to work with them and expand the collaboration. So this is just step one. In fact, you asked me about use case earlier on. So one more thing here is we have been always trying to be innovative and never stop uh, at what we're doing. So next time, we would also be working with CDX and connecting them to the power protocol. And so when newcomers come in, they can be more uh, confident to enter the DeFi market using CX as a bridge. Everything now, not yet. We haven't launched anything yet. So when we launch, we will first, of course, update all of you.
Awesome. I think I will definitely be tuning in for that. I think this is a really, really cool partnership. As a Bitcoin maxi myself, this is a super interesting announcement. And I think everybody who holds some BTC should be tuning in to the updates from WBTC as well. Uh, Perfect. I think this is where we bring it all together. I think this was a great breakdown and honestly a really important conversation. It's a shift in how we think about Bitcoin itself as an asset. We're starting to see now that it is accessible in a more productive way, not just sitting in a wallet, but actively participating in a financial system. And I think that's where Bitcoin DeFi really, really starts to matter. Nadia, I just want to say this has been a really, really insightful conversation. Thank you so, so much for your time to join us and break this very, very exciting space of the market for our audience. Before we wrap up, uh, love to just give you the floor. Any final thoughts for our audience, especially for those who are just starting to explore Bitcoin DeFi?
Yeah, so do stay tuned to our Twitter. or even can join our Telegram group. Just search for WBTC, or we even have a link in. Yeah, just stay tuned or go to our website. There's a lot of educational materials there on how to wear, blah blah blah. Last but not least, thanks for having me here. And I think you guys should all stay tuned to Cryptopolitan to get more news and get more educational materials so that it helps with your research.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nadia. That's it for today's episode, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow Cryptopolitan for more such deep dives.